we have the She Boss with us. We have an incredible woman today who's going to be sharing her heart with us, her faith, and just all the things in between.
Yay! I'm so excited.
I know. I'm so excited too. It's going to be fun. So Taylor, I'm excited to have you. Taylor Thompson, I got to know you on a random app, Clubhouse. You jumped in. I knew your name because we both are in the same industry. You've been in for a little bit. You have a lot of the same connections as me. And it's funny that our paths haven't crossed in the last 10, 20 years because we do know a lot of the same people. And when I was listening to you share, and I think it was a woman's chat room, I was like, I need to know this woman. I need to know her better because I've heard her name. You have a book with your husband, which we will talk all about. You have an amazing women's group. You've actually allowed me in on that. It's beautiful. You just are so multidimensional and you inspire a lot of women, not just in multi-level marketing, because that's our industry, but you inspire a lot of women everywhere. And I really wanted to share a little bit and get kind of the nitty gritty on you and let people in on Taylor Thompson. So say hello to our viewers, our listeners, and let's just share a little bit about you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Shylo. I appreciate the opportunity to share. And I just, everybody likes nice things said about them. And so I really just appreciate that introduction. Sometimes we go through life when we were or we do things, we go, are we really making a difference? And so that's really encouraging. So I think everybody needs to hear that, I think making an impact with just one person is powerful. So I'm super excited to be here. Can't wait to share.
I know. Well, something, that's really interesting is you have been very vulnerable in your shares. And I really appreciate that. That's why I wanted you to come on our show as well, because I got to share on yours, but I was really fascinated by the interview you did because I'm like, wow, I think more people need to hear a little bit more of your story, like where you got started, kind of the introduction, the road into where you are now. So if you want to share just what's your background? How did you get introduced to being an entrepreneur first and foremost?
Well, I mean, it is a journey and it is quite a story. I was definitely that girl that I was raised on the other side of the tracks, if you will. I come from a very, my background is, very dysfunctional. I think the more I interview women, the more I realize that, most everybody kind of comes from a sorted kind of background, but I was, my dad, after coming home from the Vietnam War, he was a little bit messed up and he was very abusive to my mom. I was actually kidnapped at gunpoint at the age of 5. And my mom didn't know where I was for 10 months of my life. She didn't know I was dead or alive. And so that's kind of the starting of I was the only child. And so this journey of really not necessarily trusting adults too much, with your heart and being a little more, children should be seen and not heard, kind of mentality. My mom ended up while she was trying to find me, she ended up finding my stepfather and they developed a relationship. So immediately upon her finding me, within a month she was married and I had this new role model, this new man in my life. So that's kind of how it got, for me, it got started. I started with this brand new man in my life, this role model. And so you see, I mean, your listeners can't see that I have long hair, right? And I've always had long curly hair. And immediately my brand new stepfather, because I was starting school, he cut all my hair off. So I used to have hair down to my waist and he cut all my hair and I looked, and so it was curly. So it made it even curlier. And so I looked like a boy. So I started first grade, and immediately I was bullied because I was tall and had this short curly hair. So I started out, learning how to navigate relationships, from I guess from a perspective of not really being able to fit in and learning how to adapt quickly. I don't know if so, fast forward, that was kind of the start that I got, but I ended up going to college. That's where I met my children's father, and he was he was this major athlete, and he ended up being drafted into the NFL. You live what you learn, right? So whenever you are in relationships or you're in patterns of relationships if that's all you know, that's what you end up living. And so because I'd watched my mom all of my life and not really having a very strong sense of worth, not necessarily having a strong sense of who I was, I found myself in that kind of this very controlling, emotionally, physically abusive kind of relationship. I look back on that and, you talk about faith and you talk about, I wasn't the girl that was raised in a church home, but my grandparents, they always were like my rock. They were always like praying for me, are you going to church? I was the girl that rode the church bus, right? And I'm backtracking a little bit. So I because I always had that kind of role model on the backside. Mm-hmm. But whenever I met this man, and you the culmination of all of these things that, make you who you are, make up who you become. And I just didn't have I don't think I had the capacity to really love me, you know what I mean? And be really confident, because you go through this mindset, you start settling. Mm-hmm. You start checking all the boxes, because he was like this guy. He was this amazing athlete, comes from a good family. He was a quote unquote Christian. He was the star. Like every girl wanted this guy, and I had him. Right.
So, yeah. Before we go forward, let's just bring up a few things, because a lot of our listeners, they can relate to this. You talked about childhood trauma instantly. Both of us share honestly, your story is very similar to mine in many ways. Traumatic childhood, very young, which kind of catapulted you into this fight or flight, because that's something that doesn't go away right away. As children, we get put into that. And when a child gets put into like survival mode, they don't forget that ever in their life. It's just ingrained. And so it's a natural instinct, but when you're in it all the time and for years at a time, you don't just come out of it because mom has a nice boyfriend. I don't mean to say it like that, but you know what I mean? I had the same type of, you have a good mentor, a role model. They help kind of make it feel safe, but you're never ultimately safe. And then you brought up like the generational patterns. Like, how many times are we going to repeat the same things? My mom did this, my grandmother did this. Also, it's interesting how God he'll sneak his way into our lives, right? Like, we might have the most chaotic life, but grandma or grandpa's there, right? My grandma and grandpa were also my rocks. And so it's really interesting that all these things were happening, right? And you were kind of going into this pattern of you met the guy that everyone would have thought was fabulous, right? This is the guy. And so for me, I'll speak for me, I did something similar, and it was like, this is what I should be doing. Right? This is what people want me to do, because on paper, that's right. I go to school because I'm supposed to go to college. I'm supposed to do all the things that no one else did in my family. I'm going to break the chains, but we're not really breaking the chains. We're going with the totally wrong way. We end up in these abusive or toxic relationships. And then we're going, what did I just do? I did everything I said I wouldn't do. And then you experience shame and all the things. So I just wanted to catch our listeners are totally getting this, because I know that I have women message me all the time and say, I'm so grateful that you're honest about your childhood. I'm so grateful you talk about the generational things and the really tough stuff. And I think it's really important to get there. And so you got into this relationship with the superstar, right? Obviously the superstar, you had your babies. So what happened after that?
Well, I mean, I want to say this because I think this is a real important part to this equation. Whenever you're checking all the boxes, to your point, you think that you're just kind of folding in the mold of what people want you to do, and not necessarily knowing enough about yourself to know, like, okay, is this right for me? Is this the, and, I remember him asking me to marry him, the proposal. And there may be a lot of ladies that can relate to this. It's not because I was so excited to say yes. It was that I was afraid to say no. That's how much power he already had over me. Mm-hmm. And, I tried to break off the relationship. I thought I had the strength, and I tried one time, and that was the last time that he chased me down the street and threw me over his shoulder and carried me back to his apartment and sat on top of me with his hands around my throat, saying, "Nobody will ever love you like I love you." Right. And so you go, okay, so this is the life. So I already felt trapped before I even said I do. And it was fine as long as I was and I don't want to sound this as condescending, but like the arm candy, I was I had a box, then I had a role to play. Yep. And so he was in, he was, like I said, he was playing professional football, and I found myself pregnant. He was playing for the LA Raiders. My first time I flew into Los Angeles, LA was on fire. It was during the riots. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you think back on that time, but, so my first baby, we had just moved to California, and my first doctor's visit with my very first appointment with my new doctor at 8 months pregnant, they couldn't find a heartbeat. Oh. You look back and you think like the journey of, and how God, you talk about how God kind of, I didn't know anyone, but it was very interesting, the place that God put me in, because I got involved with the church. Because the ladies, the wives, the NFL wives, they had like a Bible study, and they had this little church, and it was called Hope Chapel. And, you have to remember that this Southern Baptist, I grew up in West Texas, and, I went to Baptist churches, and I remember my grandfather, whenever we moved to California, he was like, "Now don't you go get involved in those charismatic churches out there." And, and I was like, what does that even mean? And what did I do? I go to this Hope Chapel, and I mean, like, it was like the first time that I'd really experienced I understood the presence of the Lord, and I understood the presence of the Holy Spirit. And I mean, I don't know what the belief system of your viewers, but I mean, I just craved it. I couldn't get enough of it. And it was a healing process. It was like this, God just swooped in, and he was everything to me. My relationship exploded with him. It was in that moment that it was only him. And then 6 weeks later, I found myself pregnant again. And so I go through this process of, he ended up having a career in an injury. After having our second baby there in California, we moved back to Texas, and I found myself in West Texas again, coming full circle, going, is this really going to be my life? And he was going back to school, and I was, there's a lot of moms that probably connect to this piece right here. I was faced with like going to work, finding a job, and not that I had a very strong work ethic, but I could not bear the thought of putting her in daycare. I wanted something different. I was the latchkey kid, right? I was the one that, got myself ready, did all of this, came home from school. I didn't have a parent at home whenever I went to school. I didn't have a parent home whenever I came home from school. And I was like, I can't imagine. I don't want that for my child. And that's what really set me on the journey to be an entrepreneur. I was so desperate. I say you do things through inspiration or desperation. And I was so desperate to find something. And you have to think about 28 years ago, there was not opportunities like what we see on social media now, like, all these shiny objects. You can do this, you can do that, you can go here, you can go there. I mean, this was before internet. This was before cell phones. This was whenever phones were literally hardwired to the wall. The only opportunities were like you could find ads in the newspaper. And, I was answering all of these ads, work from home, stuff envelopes. I mean, I literally did this, like stuffing envelopes. And whenever I found like, campaign them to get the envelopes, it made no sense. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I was answering these other ads, and it was a big health and nutrition company. If I said the company, you'd know who it is, a 40-year-old giant. Mm-hmm. It was health and nutrition. But I had this mindset. I was like, oh my gosh, I can't sell. I don't want to sell anything. That's just not for me. I can't see myself. Oh my God, that's just. And what was funny is that there was this lady that lived across the street, Shylo, that she was this little redheaded lady, and she had all these bumper stickers all around her cars, like lose weight now, ask me how. And I was like, oh my dear God, if that's the way you have to do, I'm definitely not interested in, doing any of that. And so through this process, and I just kept, going through things. I did this mated beaded jewelry, that was going to be part-time. And, after 4.5 hours of making one earring, I was like, okay, this is definitely not working. I mean, just crazy stuff. I actually processed Angora goat hair out of my bathtub. Now that's a story in and of itself.
Oh my gosh. What's funny? Okay. So I think a lot of entrepreneurs, for sure, we've done a lot of crazy stuff. Like when I got introduced to network marketing as well, there was no internet, like in the very beginning. This was before the internet. So I was really fresh. I just got married. I was like getting divorced already because it was not a good relationship. And then I'm like, what do? I started cleaning houses. I was serving, and I'm like, it's not enough. Like I have to get out of this. And so I was doing like some random affiliate things I was stuffing envelopes. Like you said, I was at like a insurance agency doing things. I was trying all the things. I helped a creditor at one point. Like I worked in a creditor's office. I lasted a week. I hated the job. I'm like, I don't want to sit in here. I don't want to do this. And so I was just dying to find something. But it's funny because we'll do anything just to get out of it. And it's like, whew. And then we finally find network marketing. And you know what? I do give a lot of praise to network marketing, because I know there's times where it's like, you got the woman with the bumper stickers. That's what people think. They're like, oh, it's the crazy lady from down the street. Well, yeah, we're all a little crazy. But, when you do find that first paycheck or something, when you first see that success, it's like, wow. Then you get it. You get what the crazy ladies are all excited about.
It's so true. I mean, it's so true, because this is a funny story, because whenever I was answering all of these ads, and finally I ended up answering this other ad. But what really got my attention is that somebody on the other end told me this story. Now, I'm so passionate about people's stories, and I think this is because it's what got me. And they told me about this little couple that was living in this small town in West Texas, not very far from where I live, that was making $10,000 a month. Now you have to think about, 28 years ago, $10,000. I mean, it's still a lot of money, but then it was like a lot of money. And, I didn't believe for a minute that somebody like me, the girl from the other side of the tracks, who was raised in a mobile home, most of her life, could make that kind of money. But I thought, gosh, if they can do that, maybe I can make $800, because Shylo, that was really all I cared about. I mean, my mindset was, if I could just do that, that was equivalent to me working full time and paying for childcare. Right. So I knew that if I could just get that, I was even. And so immediately, so this is the funny part of the story, that little redheaded lady across the street, she ended up being my sponsor.
Of course.
So, of course, right. And it took an ad in the newspaper to get her, to get me, right. And so what a funny story. But I was the proverbial, I mean, I didn't know anything. I was ignorance on fire, seriously, they just said, get on these products. And here's the thing, like, I was just total blind faith, because I just believed if they could do it, I could do it. and didn't know anything. But my very first 7 days, I lost like 5 pounds on the products, and I made $420 my very first 7 days. Wow. And I just went on to just talk to anybody that was breathing, and I made $2,400 my very first month. And that was really set the pace for how I grew my business. I mean, I just did what I was really important. For me, it was just like, I came into this incubator that allowed for somebody like me to increase their belief that it's possible if they just kept doing it and was consistent with their efforts. And I feel very fortunate to that I had that opportunity to come in to instill belief that it was a safe kind of learning environment that allowed somebody like me to have success. And so, that's in it. But, the other side of the coin, is that the more success that I had as I grew with the business, the more threatened my household was.
I was going to ask this. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, because, you're starting to grow, you're starting to become more, well, now I'm not the girl in the box. Now I'm not the arm candy. Now, I'm being independent. I'm blooming. I'm and he's not. So now there's more threats. And so, but this is where the interesting thing is that the more volatile behind the closed doors became, as I was having my babies. I mean, I ended up having 3 little girls and doing this business and becoming a multi-6-figure earner in this company. And my success, the more success that I had, the more volatile the home life was. I had a ministry at my church. I had an aerobic ministry. People may not even know what aerobics are these days, but I mean, like I taught,
That's fun.
It was like, so I taught step classes. I mean, like step aerobics. Some people may not even know what that is. I don't even think they do that anymore, but the boxes, and because that's what my degree was in. And I had an aerobic ministry. And everything was just like on my business life, right? My outside life was amazing, but my home life and my personal life was tumultuous. Sure. But I had to be face forward, and you can there may be a lot of women to identify, like nobody knew what was happening behind closed doors. I was face forward. My life was perfect. If somebody were looking in, they would go, "Oh my gosh, she has a beautiful life. Look, she's got everything. She's got it all." Right. Mm-hmm. But I didn't. It's very interesting that I think how women really go face forward and they protect what's happening because there's shame. There's what if somebody finds, my parents didn't even know. My parents did not even know what was happening behind closed doors. But what really took place for me, Shylo, is that I have 3 little girls that are watching this. Mm-hmm. I have 3 little girls that are watching, making this. I can't make this be normal. I can't make this be their normal. I can't make them think that this is okay, that this is how women who are supposed to be loved and adored and cherished, that I can't let them see that this is normal. Mm-hmm. And so I pushed back, and the more that I pushed back, the more volatile things became until finally, I broke, and I literally packed our stuff. I grabbed their clothes, and I grabbed a few things, and I literally walked out with my girls with them in tow. Mm. And unbelievably that people blamed me. My church blamed me. How could you do that? How could you leave him? I lost my church. I lost my business family. Everybody put the blame on me because nobody knew. I had protected him for so long. Now he turned around and he became the victim.
Of course.
He became the victim, and now everybody was angry with me. And I'm like, now I'm trying to defend myself because I'm like, people, like, I've been going to marriage counseling by myself for the last 2 years. Mm-hmm. Because the deal, here's the conversation. You can probably appreciate this, is that because he came from the ideal home and he had the ideal life, we wouldn't have a problem if you weren't such a bitch. We wouldn't have any problems if you weren't so effed up.
Mm-hmm.
We wouldn't have a problem if you didn't have all this baggage that you brought into the relationship.
Right.
Right.
I can totally relate. Something that very interesting with your story, I call it superstar syndrome. When you come into, when you take a relationship and somebody was at the forefront, very public, very like the figure. And then, as the wife, we'll use yours example, but I understand this very much. When those roles reverse, and I'll say it this way, when a career is ended, not by choice. Okay. Mm-hmm. When a career wasn't retired out, when a career wasn't a decision made with the spouse, it's done. Now we go back. Now we start over. This person takes what defined them, because it really did define them. That defined them. And now you step in and you are standing in your power and your strength, and you are going to take the role on as you get to be that person for the family now. It doesn't always go well. I'm going to say that this happens a lot with any entrepreneurship. Okay. It is hard to find, but it is there. Two people that can support each other equally at different times and be proud even when they're maybe not at their highest. And when I see it called superstar syndrome, that person's identity is gone. You're finding yours, and that is threatening. Yes. You're not doing anything wrong. But then when the victim stuff comes out, like, I understand the protecting. You don't want to ever disrespect your spouse. You don't ever want to air your dirty laundry, even to your family. You don't want to be the burden. You don't want to come in and be like, oh, this happened again. Because that's not how you do things. And being a woman of faith, you confide in God, you pray, you do the things, you were going to counseling, you were doing the things. Then it comes to this point where, and your story is so relatable, I could seriously start crying. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to hold back because it's very close to home. And then you end up being the person who did all the things. I mean, I have been told at one point that I saved you. And I'm like, but you didn't, because I was a very independent woman before I met you. Mm-hmm. That was very painful. And I know that that's not the truth. And even sometimes things are said in anger so silly, but you're like, that one hurt, because that's not true. I was taking care of myself. I was very doing well. I felt that I was a very successful woman on my own. But to take away that part was like, what? And some of the things they'll say anything to make sure that people feel bad for them. And that can really put you in a place, not only does your shame come up, the shame is just terrible. In a relationship like that, you blame yourself. Even if you're getting hit, if you're getting yelled at, you're like, it must be my fault. I must not have worked hard enough. I must not have, maybe I need to change more. Maybe I need to get better. And then you come into this self-development business where all you do is get better and better and better. And all they do is get more mad, because they're not willing to do it with you, and they're not willing to change because they don't feel they need to. Yeah. And so it is a very toxic cycle that I can relate with so much, but also a lot of listeners can relate to this. So I'm so grateful you're being so vulnerable today, because this is something people need to hear. Verbal, physical abuse is abuse, and it is very, very hard. Not one is better or worse. They're equally as terrible. It's like saying, would you rather die instantly and not know, or would you rather have cancer and die for 5 years? Either is bad. There's no one's going to pick either. But right. Both, there's chronic stress, and there's just chronic, you're always in constant trauma. Again, you were in your survival. So you go from this childhood where you were in fight or flight the entire time. You probably get out of it for a little while. You're easing into, being an adult, a woman, and, you get engaged, or you start dating this amazing man, and you get put right back into it. It's like, boom, there it is. And then you go into this cycle. So now you leave. You are a single mama.
Well, this is where the story gets very interesting.
Okay.
So it's very, I mean, because, I did not want to, take my kids. I did not necessarily want, I didn't want to break up our family,
Right.
Because I mean, I literally I moved only just a couple of blocks from where we were currently living. I have 3 daughters. I want them to have a relationship with their father, but I also want him to take some responsibility for what's happening.
Sure.
And so my thought process was that if I left, that he would open his eyes, like, okay. And then because, the one time that he did go to counseling, the counselor, this is a Christian counselor, saying, listen, Mister, until you take some responsibility, this marriage stands a snowball's chance in hell. Well, so I was thinking he may, if I remove myself, that he may go, oh, eye opener. Oh, I got to get my act together. Oh, I got to do something. I got to work. I got to do something to save my family. That's what I thought he would do. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, I mean, he broke into the house we were the very first day, and he beat me up again. He threw me up against the wall with his, just nearly strangled me until I passed out in front of our 3 daughters. And that was the breaking point for me. I was like, I'm done. And that's whenever I filed for divorce. And so immediately, and there's just, there's so many things that this man did to me during this process. It's like, is he mentally okay? Like, I mean, it was just so weird. I had so many police reports, throughout this process, the police coming, 911. And, one of my best friends, we had the kids, and I was picking up the kids, and this is during our separation. And, he just goes off. We're in the car. She's a psychologist. She teaches psychology. She is a doctor. She is a psychologist teaching at Texas Tech University, in the car with her children, with my children. And this guy goes off, like, beating on the windows. And I'll never forget her telling me this. And this is whenever I knew I had made the right decision for me and my children, is when she said, Taylor, she said, that is an OJ waiting to happen.
Yeah.
It was such an eye opener for me, Shylo, because I was like, for somebody to visually see what I had been experiencing and to watch that unfold as a doctor, as a psychiatrist, to share that with me, I really knew that I had to pay attention. And so fast forward, we go through our divorce. He fights me for custody of our children, of our girls. And I'm on the witness stand sharing my whole history, marriage history, to a judge that's sitting there sleeping to the left of me, literally snoring. Now, you keep in mind, he is the hometown hero. He is the all-star, Hall of Famer, NFL star, blah, 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 small West Texas,
Yep.
So, and I'm sitting there going, now I had 10 witnesses. He had one, his mother, who had accused me of physically abusing our children. I'm sitting there asking I'm like looking at my attorney going, what do I do? And he's like motions for me to keep going, instead of saying, hey, judge, you might want to wake up here. He motioned for me to keep talking, and I did. Big mistake. Long story short, I lost custody in that district courtroom of my 3 daughters, who I had been the stay-at-home mom and the primary caregiver of, to this man who was abusive, this man who I had presented umpteen police reports of abuse, of 911, and the judge who had been sleeping during my testimony, and he gave custody to that man of my 3 daughters. Now you can imagine, like, you talk about being broken, completely broken. I thought my life was over.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a lot of people don't know this part of my story, Shylo. And, I really wanted, I had no purpose. I had no purpose at that point. I mean, nobody can even imagine. And this really set my trajectory of, but God.
Mm-hmm. How did you, number one, I almost took my own life. I always say I almost went to be with Jesus permanently 2 years ago. I just hit a bottom and I just felt like, what? And I had a split moment where I realized this isn't the end of the world. Like, just something stopped me. I'm like, this isn't it. Like, this isn't your story. Yeah. But I know that pain, not of my children, but I went through a tough time with my daughter in that. And I did lose my daughter for a while. I didn't lose custody. I lost her. And to lose your daughter for 10 years with no contact, like barely any contact, trying to make sure she's not dead in the ditch. That was horrible. I couldn't imagine having all three of my children being, almost taken away. So how did you keep going, and what did you do to get to that next step?
Well, you have to understand, I mean, this is a man, he didn't want them. He just didn't want me to have them.
Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And he moved them literally 100 miles away against court order. And now I'm the caregiver. Now I'm paying who had fought me for my business. Now I'm paying child support based on my income.
Okay.
Wow. And I have to keep moving, and, I have to keep moving. And it was hard. I mean, but it was really, it was God, I use this, God gives you grace for the place. I mean, he really does give you grace. I mean, I look back in those moments and I'm like, how did I do that? And it was just God, like, carrying me through, because I don't know. I just kept moving. I just kept my eyes on him, because it was only him. You have to remember, like, my church had turned their back on me. And now everybody's like, oh, now see, now there's what have you been hiding? So now I have the scarlet letter, so to speak.
Sure.
What kind of mom loses custody of their children? Like, are you on drugs? Are you like, I mean, my attorney was like, in 30 years of practice, I've never seen such a miscarriage of justice. I've never seen, and come to find out, 2 months later, the judge that was in my case was diagnosed with narcolepsy and was taken off the bench. He was no longer. And so, but because I didn't have that on the court record, because I didn't speak, I could not appeal the decision.
Oh, man.
And so it's just like, so it just really set me on the trajectory. Like, okay, how do I shift gears? How do I be a mom, 100 miles away? How does that work? And how do you keep your business going? How do you keep your focus? How do you keep your mindset? How do you keep moving? How do you keep fighting when over here, whenever your life is crap over here, but you have to keep face forward in your business over here? I mean, how do you do all that? Grace for the place. That's the only way that I look back. I mean, like, the man wouldn't even let me speak to them on the phone. And you have to, they were, here's our ages: 7, 5, and 3.
Oh, just babies.
Right? 7, 5, and 3. But, I mean, Shylo, I mean, God, and I mean, it's a whole unbelievable story how God, my scripture through this process was that in Joel, that God would redeem all the years that the locusts had eaten. Right. So as I went through the journey and the business and, keeping because I always say, like, your personal life and your business life are never typically good at the same time. There's usually, it's either your business is just going through the pit, or your life is. I mean, there's never at one time, very rare that anybody has both plates spinning simultaneously. And so how do you keep that focus? How do you keep moving? How do you do that? I mean, to me, like, I can't imagine not having the Lord, having my scripture, the things that I hang on to that kept me going, that my prayer life, I can't imagine going through those things without the Lord. But he was so gracious. He's been so gracious. I mean, in the process of going through this, he brought an amazing man in my life. Amazing. Like, I mean, you talk about soulmate made for me. And I literally say he probably did save me, but it was in that God was just so faithful that allowed for me to meet a man who was like-minded in business, that loved me and through the process, and allowed me to be able to do the things that I needed to do in the natural to get my children back. And, in and through the journey of this, and it was him, it was my husband, Larry, and he was like, everything is a season. You may have missed some of these times. And now keep in mind, through this process and while I'm getting my daughters back through the court systems, which is not easy. Mm-mm. I mean, they don't care if it was a lie. They really don't. They really, the court system is not just. There is no justice, really. There's only justice with God. Mm-hmm. And that, whenever I totally relinquish the fact of really fighting and really allowing that scripture, the battle belongs to the Lord, and really just laying it at his feet and laying it down, and me quit trying to control everything and just trust the Lord. And whenever I laid it down, whenever I truly became like, okay, Lord, if this is the way you want me to be a mom, if this is my journey, whenever I totally submitted and said, okay, if this is the cross I'm to bear, then I'm going to do it full of joy. And I'm going to trust you to lead my steps. I'm going to trust you to light my path, and my time is in your hands. And I remember that shift of really saying, Lord, not my will, but your will. And whenever that shift took place, how the doors started opening supernaturally without me, right? That I was like, oh my gosh. And so I realized that, it was really about me being a get it the first time girl. Instead of keeping going around the mountain, I learned really early on, like, okay, Lord, what do you want to teach me? What is it in it for me? What do you want me to learn? I'm ready. The student is here. I don't want to only go around this mountain once. That's it. And I'm going to take the test and I'm going to pass so we can move on. That was my mindset, that I just didn't want to keep going around the same mountains personally, spiritually, business-wise. I don't know if I hope this is helping some listeners here, because I don't want to get on my preaching soapbox, but I'm just saying that how I did it and how I broke through, and how God has been so gracious in my personal life to allow my 3 daughters. Now, if you think about this, Shylo, how gracious they could have been, and this, how they could have been so scarred, how they could have been so, with their own baggage, right? God has been so gracious to protect them, their minds, who they are, and the young women that they have, come into. that God allowed them to be restored to me in those years when probably they needed me the most, in those teenage, those younger teenage years. Mm-hmm. And when they really, really, really need mom. And I mean, let's just talk about it. They're in their, early 20s. I think they need me now more than they did whenever they were little. I think, navigating through life at this stage is incredible. Mm-hmm. But anyway, that story is a powerful story, but it is truly, truly a God story.
That is. Well, you've done incredible things. You and your husband have co-authored books, written books. You have an amazing women's network and book club and all the things. You have beautiful, your daughters are beautiful. I think a lot of women on here can relate to this. There's a lot of women in business who have been through similar journeys. I know I'm one of them. I wasn't under physical abuse or things like that, but I definitely experienced shifts in relationships and watched things break apart. And it's very, very challenging. I went through stages of feeling worthless, hopeless. And I think it's always wonderful to hear a story like yours, to know you can get through it. There's a lot of people, if they lost their children, like, what would that be? That is a very, very hard thing to deal with. And you managed to come through it. You have an amazing family and so much going on. So as we wrap, let's just do the highlight reel. The last 10, 15 years have been incredible for you and your husband. How long have you been married now? 20 years? 15?
We've been together for 18 years, but we've been married 16.
Okay, there we go. I was close. So it's been an incredible journey. You've done really well in the network marketing space, and you help a lot of people through ministry or your sermons, preaching. Anything you want to share with our listeners, we're also going to post links and everything to Taylor. So if you want to be a part of Taylor's world, we will make sure you have the links. But anything you want to share, if somebody wants to get a hold of you, how can they find you?
So my husband and I, we have a book club. It's called themillionairetraining.com. And it really is about equipping we'll say the average person, right? I mean, no matter where you are in your journey, really equipping you for the leadership skills necessary for you with foundational concepts that, as time, as things change, as things evolve, you will be able to evolve with it. And it's training that's tried and true. And we have a free book club that you can join through themillionairetraining.com. We go live every Friday at 12 Central. And so it's lots of fun hearing the stories and really hearing about people that are just like you. So it's generic, it's, and it's open, it's free to anybody that wants to participate. And then we have the She Network. And you mentioned this in my ladies group. And this has really been kind of a passion side gig, if you will. Mm-hmm. To your point, I mean, there's so many women like us, that have been on a journey, that have been in places, and how did they overcome and how did they get through the process? And I think by having these conversations, I really wanted to create a place where women could feel empowered. She Network, she stands for sharing her excellence. Mm-hmm. And, because I think so many women don't realize they have a gift. They have an excellence on the inside of them. They have, through their experience, through their journey, that they have a story to share. And that's why, again, when I started the interview, I believe so many people have the music, the story that's inside of them, and they shrink back, and they're not willing to be open. They're not willing to be, authentic, because they're afraid of how people are going to receive them and how people will see them and receive them. And so I just want to encourage the women that are listening here, you have a story that somebody needs to hear, and you are an inspiration. You are a solution to someone else's problem. You know, you are the light for someone walking behind you, that you can really be a light and light their path to the same point, you know, because, you know, we're all on the journey. We're all in this in this together, but don't shrink back. You know, share your story, share the pain, share the trials, share the tribulations and how you got through, because I promise you, somebody within your reach needs to hear what you have to say. Somebody needs to be inspired. Somebody needs to be encouraged. Somebody needs to be empowered. And that's what that's all about. So She Network, myshenetwork.com. And then we have a free Facebook group, the She Network. So it's fun.
Well, we're going to drop all the links and everything will be available for all our listeners and viewers. But thank you for sharing your excellence today. And everyone does need to hear these stories. I mean, your story has been, you had me quiet. So if I'm quiet, you know it's good. I think everyone was like very intent to what you were saying, because there's a lot of women who can relate to this. And that's why we have to share. Even if we impact one person, we did our job, right? Yes. So Taylor Thompson, thank you so much. I can't wait to hug you in person soon. I know we'll get that opportunity one day. Yes. I'd love to meet your wonderful husband. I am Shylo Eckstrom and I'm signing off. This has been one heck of a show.
Thank you, Shylo. Thank you for having me. Thank you.